The latest talks of ceasefire in Doha has ended without a breakthrough, but technical teams will continue meetings and negotiators will meet again next week in an attempt to end the war. The White House has come up with a new proposal for a deal. Now, reports say there is headway, but nothing concrete yet. President Joe Biden has warned all sides not to undermine the efforts for a ceasefire. Biden said that a deal was nearing, even though it was not there yet.
I'll say one thing about one of the reasons why I was late for y'all was I was dealing with the ceasefire effort in the Middle East. And we are closer than we've ever been. I don't want to jinx anything, but as my grandfather would say, with the grace of God, good little neighbors, a lot of luck, we may have something. But we're not there yet. It was much, much closer than it was 3 days ago. So, 6 or 3 years ago. Thank you.
In a joint statement, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt said that Washington has presented a new proposal for a deal. The statement added that the new proposal was built on points of agreement over the past week, closing gaps between the sides in a way that could allow a rapid implementation of a deal. The hopeful language of the statement may also be aimed at further stalling Iranian retaliation against Israel over the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last month. However, Hamas accused Washington of trying to create a false atmosphere without any genuine intention of stopping the war. Expectations were low for this round of ceasefire talks, which began on Thursday. Hamas, which did not participate directly in the talks, has accused Israel of adding new demands to a previous proposal that had U.S. and international support. Both sides have agreed in principle to a plan that President Biden had announced in May. But Hamas has proposed amendments and Israel has suggested clarifications, leading each side to accuse the other of trying to undermine chances of a deal. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Friday spoke to his Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu, stressing the need for de-escalation in Gaza. Prime Minister Modi reiterated India's call for a ceasefire, release of hostages, and the need for continued humanitarian aid. For more on this, we are now being joined by Peter Kuznick. He's a professor of history and director of Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Glad to be with you.
Now, the latest round of Gaza ceasefire talks in Doha has ended without a breakthrough. Now, talks are scheduled in Cairo. Now, U.S. officials do say there has been slight progress. Even President Joe Biden said so. How optimistic are you regarding the talks in Cairo?
Well, the situation certainly looks better today than it did 2 or 3 days ago. Slightly more hopeful. They seem to be actually talking and negotiating, but unfortunately, we're still far from a solution and a resolution. Hamas says in its initial statements that really no progress has been made. Israel is asking for additional conditions that Hamas would find unacceptable. So even though the intention was to bridge the differences between the two sides, that is not very, very easy. Netanyahu has shown no inclination to end this war until Hamas, he says, is completely eliminated. All the experts say that that is impossible. That will never happen. So we have some hope, but we don't have real grounds for optimism yet at this point.
Right now, with that, a U.S. official has warned that Iran would face what he called a cataclysmic consequences if it strikes Israel. It seems Iran has been closely monitoring these talks. Now, on the other side, there's Hezbollah. What do you make of this?
I see threats going back and forth. The situation is very volatile. Iran has pledged, has vowed, that it's going to retaliate for the 2 killings in Beirut and in Tehran by the Israelis, the 2 assassinations, but they've held off on this in hopes that something concrete would come from these talks. But what the Israeli Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, has been demanding or pressuring the United States and other Western allies to punish Iran seriously if Iran retaliates against Israel. And so what we've got now is the possibility of other European countries and the United States getting directly involved in the fighting, which means that we could have a broad regional war that's going to spiral out of control. So you've got Hezbollah, you've got Hamas, you've got the militias in Syria and Iraq, and you've got Iran on the one side. On the other side, the United States has moved planes into the region, warships, other aircraft carriers. This is a very, very dangerous situation. We could see an explosion of a sort that we've never really seen in the region. And then what does Russia do? What does China do? We don't know how far this could go, which is why everybody has so much hope that some reasonable solution will be found before Iran retaliates, and then Israel and the United States respond, and this can spiral out of control. So reasonable people are certainly trying to find a diplomatic solution, but Netanyahu has not shown any inclination to want to seriously negotiate. And Haniyeh was a more moderate leader who was in charge of the negotiations for Hamas, who was assassinated by Israel. And he's been replaced with somebody who's much more of a hardliner. And so I'm not very optimistic, but we have to cling to whatever hope we can and continue the negotiations and hope that the global community would put pressure. But so long as the United States continues to have Israel's back, regardless of what Israel does, refuses to not only not cut off the arms to Israel, but has now just promised $20 billion of more arms to Israel. As long as that continues, Israel will act with impunity, and the situation will not get any closer to a resolution, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. And now that you mentioned that Israel is continuing its operation in Gaza and the humanitarian condition is getting worse there. How important is the ceasefire talks at this point, now that the death count that has crossed 40,000?
It depends on who you ask. There are so many bodies buried under that rubble that do not get counted by the Gazan health authorities. The Lancet, the British medical journal, estimated weeks ago that I think was 186,000 people were actually dead in Gaza. I'm sure by now that figure is over 200,000. So, the situation is even worse. Now we're starting to see polio spreading among children because children have not been able to get their vaccinations. And so we've called for a humanitarian pause. The World Health Organization and others have asked for a humanitarian pause so that they can vaccinate the children to prevent the polio epidemic. So what was a bad situation to begin with really is becoming more and more nightmarish by the day.
All right. We're hoping for the ceasefire talks to be successful. Thank you so much. That was Peter Kuznick joining us on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.